having, in 4 weeks tonight, we will be having another Drag Queens reading project for adults here at Cafe Deux Soleils on the 20th of December. And that will be the Christmas show. So it will be a very fun evening. Remember to book. And we were already at capacity 10 minutes before we started. So this is a good. Thank you for coming out. We appreciate it. Candy and I met, like she said, New Year's Eve. He said, they said, someone over there said. In New Year's Eve 2012. That was 5 years ago next, coming up. Blah. And Candy was all in a black tux and white bow tie and just looked amazing. It was sitting at this table at the Cobalt. And of course, being drag queens, we immediately moved in, and I said, "Oh, do you mind if we sit here till your friends arrive?" And we sat at this table and started. And then eventually, after about 30 or 40 minutes, I said, "Well, what time are your friends going to arrive?" And Candy said, "Well, I'm not waiting for anybody." I went, "Oh, great, girls, we can take right over this whole end of the table." So we just, and how are you, and what are you doing, and what don't you look good? And we, of course, were all of us, each one, well over 6 feet in our air heels. And Candy is one of those very strong, powerful people who doesn't need elevated stature to connect with the people. Thank you, Candy.
Thank you, Oliv.
Sorry about the comment about your mustache. Oh my God. I didn't realize how dirty these were. Okay, I'm going to read you tonight a couple of short stories by the Brothers Grimm, the original stories. They're called fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm, and these are the original ones that they wrote. And many of us, I grew up with them, and I think many people did at a certain era. And yet we remember, our memories are so shot that we don't really remember what we think we remember. So the first one is called The Straw, the Coal, and the Bean. There once was a poor old woman who lived in a village, and she had gathered a bunch of beans that she wanted to cook. So she prepared a fire on her hearth, lighting it with a handful of straw to make it burn faster. As she was emptying the beans into the pot, one of them slipped to the floor unannounced, and they lay next to a straw. Soon after, a glowing coal jumped from the hearth and joined the other two. Then the straw began to speak. "Dear friends, where have you come from?" "Fortunately, I jumped out of the fire," responded the coal. "If I hadn't used sheer force, it would have been the end of me. I would have been burned to ashes." "I also escaped by the skin of my teeth," said the bean. "If the old woman had thrown me into the pot, I'd have been cooked into a soup without mercy like my comrades." "Do you think my fate would have been any better?" said the straw. "The old woman let all my brothers burn up in smoke. She grabbed 60 all at once and put them to death. Fortunately, I slipped through her fingers." "Well, what should we do now?" asked the coal. "Since we were so lucky to escape death, I think we should stick together like good comrades," the bean said. "Also, we better begin heading for a foreign country before there's a new fatality." This proposal pleased the other two, and they set out on their way. However, they soon came to a small brook, and since there was no bridge or way over it, they did not know how they would manage to cross it. Then the straw came up with a good idea and said, "I'll lay myself across, and then you'll be able to walk over me like a bridge." So the straw stretched itself from one bank to the other, and the coal, who had a fiery temperament, marched boldly onto the newly built bridge. Yet, when it was halfway across and heard the water murmuring below, it got frightened, stopped in its tracks, and did not dare go any further. But now the straw began to burn, broke in 2 pieces, and fell into the brook. The coal tumbled after, and as it hit the water, it gave up the ghost. The bean, which had cautiously stayed behind, had to laugh when it saw what happened, but it was unable to stop and kept laughing so hard that it burst. Now it would have been all over for the bee were it not for the traveling tailor, who had been resting near the brook. He felt so sorry for the bean that he took out his needle and thread and sewed the bean together. The bean thanked him most kindly, but because the tailor had used black thread, all beans since then have had a black seam. But you just love Germans. The hero in that was the tailor or the bean. Can never be sure. So the second shortish story I'm reading for you tonight is one that we all knew from childhood, called Rapunzel, as in the Rapunzel, let down your hair, blah, blah, blah. And I remembered it very differently from what it ended up being. And I thought, oh, I should just read this to see if it'll be something I could read in the future. But tonight, she's on. We're doing Rapunzel. Once upon a time, there was a husband and wife who for quite some time had been wishing in vain for a child. Finally, the dear Lord gave the wife a sign of hope that their wish would be fulfilled. Now, in the back of their house, the couple had a small window that overlooked a splendid garden filled with the most beautiful flowers and herbs. The garden, however, was surrounded by a high wall, and nobody dared enter it because it belonged to a sorceress who was very powerful and feared by all. One day, when the wife was standing at the window and looking down into the garden, she noticed a bed of the finest Rapunzel lettuce. The lettuce looked so fresh and green that her mouth watered, and she had a great craving to eat some. Day by day, this craving increased, and since she knew she could not get it, she began to waste away and look pale and miserable, like me. Her husband became alarmed and asked, "What's wrong with you, dear wife?" "Ah," she responded, "I shall certainly die if I don't get any of that Rapunzel from the garden behind our house." Her husband, who loved her, thought, "Before I let my wife die, I will do anything I must to make sure she gets some Rapunzel." That day at dusk, he climbed over the wall into the garden of the sorceress, hastily grabbed a handful of Rapunzel, and brought them to his wife. Immediately she made them into a salad and ate it with great zest. But the Rapunzel tasted so good to her, so very good, that her desire for them was 3 times greater by the next day. If she was to have any peace, her husband knew, he had to climb into the garden once more. So at dusk he scaled the wall again, and just as he landed on the other side, he was given a tremendous scare, for he stood face to face with the sorceress. "How dare you climb into my garden and steal my Rapunzel like a thief?" she said with an angry look. "You'll pay for this." "Oh," he cried, "please let mercy prevail over justice. I did this only because I was in a predicament. My wife noticed your Rapunzel from our window, and she developed such a great craving for it that she would have died if I hadn't brought her some to eat." Upon hearing that, the anger of the sorceress subsided, and she said to him, "If it's truly as you say, then I shall permit you to take as many Rapunzel as you like, but only under one condition. When your wife gives birth, I must have the child. You needn't fear about the child while being, for I shall take care of it like a mother." Literally. In his fear, the man agreed to everything, and when his wife had the baby, the sorceress appeared at once. She gave the child the name Rapunzel and took her away. Rapunzel grew to be the most beautiful child under the sun. But when she was 12 years old, the sorceress locked her in a tower that was in a forest. It had neither door nor stairs, only a little window high above. Whenever the sorceress wanted to get in, she would stand below and call out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair for me." Rapunzel's hair was long and radiant, as fine as spun gold. Every time she heard the voice of the sorceress, she unpinned her braids and wound them around a hook on the window. Then she let her hair drop 20 yards, and the sorceress would climb up onto it. A few years later, a king's son happened to be riding through the forest. Not a pianist. And passed by the tower. Suddenly he heard a song so lovely that he stopped to listen. It was Rapunzel who passed the time in her solitude by letting her sweet voice resound in the forest. The prince wanted to climb up to her, and he looked for a door but could not find one, so he rode home. However, the song had touched his heart so deeply that he rode out into the forest every day and listened. One time he was standing behind a tree. He saw the sorceress approach and heard her call out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then Rapunzel let down her braids, and the sorceress climbed up to her. If that's the ladder one needs to get up there, I'm going to try my luck, the prince declared. The next day, as it began to get dark, he went to the tower and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." All at once the hair dropped down and the prince climbed up. When he entered the tower, Rapunzel was at first afraid, for she had never laid eyes on a man before. Use that line. However, the prince began to talk to her in a friendly way and told her that her song had touched his heart so deeply that he had not been able to rest until he had seen her. Rapunzel then lost her fear, and when he asked her whether she would have him for her husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, "He'll certainly love me better than old Mother Gothel." So she said yes and placed her hand in his. "I want to go down with you very much," she said, "but I don't know how I can get down. Every time you come, you must bring a skein of silk with you, and I'll weave it into a ladder. When it's finished, then I'll climb down, and you can take me away on your horse." They agreed that until then he would come to her every evening, for the old woman came during the day. Meanwhile, the sorceress did not notice anything until one day Rapunzel blurted out, "Mother Gothel, how is it that you're so much heavier than the prince? When I pull him up, he's here in a second." Blonde, Rapunzel. "Ah, you godless child," exclaimed the sorceress. "What's this I hear? I thought I had made sure you had no contact with the outside world, but you've deceived me." In her fury, she seized Rapunzel's beautiful hair, wrapped it around her left hand several times, grabbed a pair of scissors with her right hand, and snip, snap, the hair was cut off, and the beautiful braids lay on the ground. Then the cruel sorceress took Rapunzel to a desolate land where she had to live in great misery and grief. On the same day that she had banished Rapunzel, the sorceress fastened the braids that she had cut off to the hook on the window. And that evening when the prince came and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she let the hair down. The prince climbed up, and instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel on top, he found the sorceress, who gave him vicious and angry looks. "Aha!" she exclaimed with contempt. "You want to fetch your darling wife, but the beautiful bird is no longer sitting in the nest, and she won't be singing anymore. The cat has got her, and it will also scratch out your eyes. Rapunzel is lost to you, and you will never see her again." The prince was beside himself with grief, and in his despair he jumped off the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns he fell into pierced his eyes, so he became blind. Now he strayed about in the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did nothing but mourn and weep about the loss of his dearest wife. Thus he wandered for many years in misery. Eventually he made his way to the desolate land where Rapunzel was leading a wretched existence with the twins, a boy and a girl, to whom she had given birth. I didn't skip a chapter, honestly. When he heard a voice that he thought sounded familiar, he went straight toward it, and then he reached her. Rapunzel recognized him. She embraced him and wept, and as two of her tears dropped on his eyes, they became clear and he could see again. Then he escorted her back to his kingdom, where he was received with joy, and they lived happily and contentedly for a long time thereafter. I mean, really, I don't know how many of you remember what you think you remember of Rapunzel. I didn't remember a lot of that. there was a lot of birds and chirping and singing and beautiful flowers. I was kind of like, oh right, I saw that movie Tangled. Thank you, PAM, for reminding me the name of it. And I was like, I wonder where they got all that stuff. Someone just came up with it in Hollywood. Isn't it interesting? Any questions? I know. Apparently, when the prince got up her hair, they were doing more than just listening to her sing. That would be where the twins would have come from, I'm supposing. Don't you love the Germans?